Chapter 1316, An Unknown City.
If I keep accumulating it bit by bit, it won't be long before I can respond to Moon City's prayers and cure their deformity, thus creating quite a miracle. In addition, I've also concluded the acting principles of a miracle invoker. It's only a matter of time before I digest it if I follow them. I might even finish within the year.
Klein retracted his gaze from outside the window, raised his left arm, and controlled the monster puppet on his hand to entertain a child across him. This made him look more like a wandering magician. If he was willing, he could even use life's cane or the grafting ability to imbue this sock puppet with living characteristics. While entertaining the child, Klein's thoughts scattered as he considered where the marionette city needed to be built for the advancement ritual.
A marionette city needs sufficient interaction to develop a corresponding region in the spirit world. This means that it isn't enough to leave it in the forsaken land of the gods. Ignoring the fact that it's sealed there, there's no way of directly connecting it to the spirit world. All I can do is rely on the little specialness it has. Even if there's no problem with it, it's difficult to create any interactivity with a place that lacks intelligent life. If it's placed in the northern and southern continent, or the sea colonies, I have to be careful. Before the ritual is about to succeed, I definitely can't expose the fact that it's a marionette city. Otherwise, it will be affected, damaged, or even attacked by Zaratul, Amon, and my other enemies. Yes, I have to give a sufficiently good reason for a marionette city to appear. Then, there won't be any abnormalities with the interaction between the traveling merchants and the surrounding humans. I have to make every marionette a living person. They have their past, present, and future. They follow their own trajectories of fate. This means that a marionette city is extremely complicated. I need to split out many worms of spirit to deal with it. This also has the risk of losing control by doing so. If they are husband and wife, they should act like husband and wife. When faced with something they are fond of, they should show joy. Perverts should be hated. This way, foreigners might hear embarrassing sounds while staying in the marionette city. I'm still just an innocent child. This is a large-scale reality show, or rather, a high-end version of Playing House. It has to be able to deceive the audience.
As Klein lampooned inwardly, he silently counted if he had enough marionettes. Previously, he had gone to the forsaken land of the gods several times and converted a large number of them. There were all kinds of monsters that might not have Beyonder characteristics. He also consciously controlled batches of rats, cockroaches, mosquitoes, and flies, hoping to make a more uncommon side of the city real enough.
I'm barely able to support a small city, so just a few more visits to the forsaken land of the gods would do.
Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, a scene suddenly appeared in front of him. At the top of the giant king's court, which was bathed in the light of dusk, the open door slowly and heavily closed. This was like a pair of invisible hands closing the entrance to the forsaken land of the gods. Klein's eyes darkened as he vaguely guessed that this scene meant that the true creator was about to seal off the forsaken land of the gods again. This was the prophetic power that came from his angel-level spiritual intuition and premonition for danger. It was about to happen a few minutes or a few seconds later.
Did the true creator capture Amon? Or has he already given up? He once again sealed off the forsaken land of the gods. Does he not want others to enter again? Isn't this too petty?
Klein mumbled inwardly, feeling a little disappointed. Of course, he barely had enough marionettes. Even if he lacked them, he could make up for it at sea. Backland, Empress Borough. Audrey had just changed her clothes and sent away her maidservants. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Susie walk in.
What's the matter? You should be out on your stroll at this time.
As an experienced spectator, Audrey immediately sensed that something was amiss. During this period of time, she had been busy making use of the influence she had in a few foundations to help the workers, farmers, and injured veterans with their hardships. She had allowed them to wait for a new job opportunity or for their plantation's production in a new season. She had a lot less interaction with Susie than usual. At the same time, Audrey was secretly guiding the workers of lower socioeconomic status from the various unions in Backland to gather their strength together. Her previous experiences made her understand that counting on the kindness of the upper class wasn't reliable or long-lasting. A single person appeared puny and powerless in the face of the government, nobles and powerful merchants. Only by summoning the combined strength of a large number of civilians could a balance be formed. The Lone Kingdom had unions in different industries a long time ago, but the upper echelons of these associations were easily bribed. Instead, they became effective weapons against ordinary workers. Susie glanced at Audrey with a rather normal expression, but her mouth seemed to be out of control. It vibrated the air and let out a deep male voice. "Miss Audrey, I'm the president of the Psychology Alchemists, Eric Drake. I wish to meet you and discuss with you about becoming a counselor of the Psychology Alchemists. I'm at the nearby park." Having said that, Susie heaved a long sigh of relief and regained her original voice.
Audrey, there's a strange guy looking for you. I can't remember what he looks like. He directly placed the words he wanted to say into my mind island.
Audrey's pupils dilated slightly before immediately returning to normal. She calmly nodded and said,
Where is he at the park?
As she spoke, Audrey secretly conjured a virtual persona and entered Susie's mind island through the sea of collective subconscious. She checked if it was still distorted by some external consciousness or knowledge.
I don't remember. I was having my stroll,
Susie said as she recalled. Then, she wagged her tail slightly and said,
I don't think you should go. It's dangerous.
After confirming that Susie didn't have any latent problems with her virtual persona, Audrey exhaled and said,
It will be even more suspicious if I don't go. That way, danger will be unavoidable. It might even affect the rest of the people in the house. Besides, this is also an opportunity. Just as Mr. Hangman said, since the end of the world is coming, all the hard work and attempts that will not bring disaster are meaningful.
Audrey added inwardly before saying,
I will protect myself. Susie, did anything happen to you just now?
Susie barked and said,
No, Audrey, are you really going?
Yes.
Audrey gave a clear answer. Then Susie mustered up her courage and said,
Can you bring me along? Just like before, I'm just a dog in their eyes.
Audrey replied with a faint smile.
No, there's no need. I'll be back very soon. Believe me, I'll be blessed by a deity.
After comforting Susie, she used her psychological invisibility and left the luxurious villa like she usually did. When she was far away, in a corner on the first floor, a servant who was cleaning suddenly bowed his head and softly said words that he had never learned before.
A fool that doesn't belong to this era.
In the ancient palace above the fog, the figure sitting in the fool's seat naturally looked at the newly formed prayer light and realized that the believer was extremely unfamiliar.
It's identical to Miss Justice's home environment. I can suspect that it's a result of guidance created by a virtual persona's invasion of the Mind Island. Miss Justice used this method to avoid any surveillance and pray for blessings.
The figure quickly came to a conclusion and transferred the corresponding situation to his true body. A few seconds later, Klein entered Sapphira Castle and allowed the worms of spirit to burrow into his body.
Miss Justice is becoming more and more like a high-sequence spectator.
Klein praised inwardly as he cast his gaze at the crimson star representing justice. In the park with a lake. As soon as Audrey entered, she saw a large carriage drive over. The carriage driver was an ordinary middle-aged man, wearing an old hat and a dark-colored jacket. However, in Audrey's eyes, this carriage driver didn't exist because he didn't have a corresponding island of consciousness or mind. In other words, the carriage driver was just an illusion, a fake, and the controller of the carriage was the horse itself. A few seconds later, the large carriage stopped in front of Audrey. The door creaked open. "Please come in." A deep male voice came from inside. Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt slightly and boarded the carriage. She saw a man sitting on a black wheelchair. His pale yellow eyebrows were long and his hair was neatly combed back. There were some wrinkles on his forehead, and his face was abnormally pale.
Mr. Durlau, aren't you already dead?
Audrey recognized the man in front of her and expressed her surprise perfectly. The elderly gentleman who was sitting in a black wheelchair replied with a smile. To a spectator, death only represents the end of one's identity. In other theatrical plays, I'm still alive. Apart from the former royal family's medical consultant, the former chancellor of Backlund Medical School, I'm also King of the Black Throne Barrows Hopkins at sea. I'm the famous hermit, Eric Drake, etc. Audrey asked politely as she watched the door close automatically from the corner of her eye.
Then how should I address you?
The old gentleman stroked the wheels on both sides of his wheelchair and said, You can call me Mr. President, or you can continue calling me Mr. Durlau. He then pointed to the seat on the left side of the carriage. Have a seat. Let's head somewhere first before discussing you becoming a counselor of the psychology alchemists. Audrey nodded slightly and calmly sat down. Without hiding anything, she cast her gaze out of the window and was surprised to find that in the blink of an eye, the park had turned into an unfamiliar city, one that was shrouded in darkness. The city was filled with extremely mysterious and beautiful buildings that gave off a dark feeling. There were gentlemen wearing top hats and trench coats, as well as women in complicated and dark dresses. As Audrey swept her gaze, she saw a gentleman with short black hair beside a carriage, revealing sharp canine fangs in his mouth. This was a werewolf. Chapter 1317, Pride. What is this place? Audrey asked without much change in her expression, as though she was asking about the location of the ball tonight. Pauli Derlau, who claimed to be the president of the psychology alchemists, cast his gaze out the window as well. He smiled and said, This is the city in everyone's heart. It's present wherever there are people. Audrey nodded in thought.
In other words, you can enter this place from any corner of human society?
Durlau stroked his wheelchair and said, That's right. He didn't explain further, and instead pointed at the pedestrians outside the carriage. Everything here has a corresponding psychological symbol. They are called bestial desire. Bestial desire. Audrey repeated the word silently. As she maintained her dignified posture, she cast her gaze even further. Among the pedestrians, there were werewolves, as well as walking upright bears. There were cats with lazy expressions, and there was a strange man with the face of a spotted spider, a huge mouse with red eyes, a python with its tongue sticking out, and a canine creature that studied every creature that passed it by, with eyes filled with the desire to mate. They were either wearing a top hat and trench coat or an exquisite and complicated long dark dress, doing their best to imitate humans in every detail, but they were unable to truly resemble a human. The carriage traveled through the darkness of the night, traveling between pedestrians and all kinds of Gothic buildings. Soon, they arrived at a cathedral in the middle of the city. The cathedral was more than 80 meters tall, propped up thanks to the numerous black columns. Each pillar was embedded with a certain number of skulls. Some of them came from humans, while others came from different creatures. However, their empty eye sockets were tilted downwards, as though they were observing at every living creature that entered the cathedral. Just like most buildings here, every detail in the cathedral could be said to be exquisite. But they formed the elements that leaned towards nightmare, horror, terror, and mystery. After getting off the carriage, Audrey saw a grand but empty hall through the main door. In the depths of the hall stood a huge cross. Curled around the cross was a grayish-white dragon statue. Unlike ordinary cathedrals, there were no pews for believers to pray, nor were there places for candle stands. However, in front of the dragon statue there was a small long table. On both sides of the long table were 5 seats, and the seats at both ends were empty. Pauli Durlau wheeled himself to the end of the long table where the seat of honor was. Then he pointed to his left. Please take a seat. Audrey slowly followed behind him. She looked around and casually pulled out a chair before sitting down. She wasn't too close to the president of the psychology alchemists, nor was she too far away. She perfectly showed her vigilance and didn't show any signs of guilt. Polly Durlau raised his hands and clasped them together before placing them on the surface of the long table. "Miss Audrey, I have something to ask you."
Please speak.
Audrey turned her head slightly and responded with her green eyes. Durlau nodded slightly and said, "I would like to know how you advanced to sequence form manipulator. Where did you get your potion formula and beyonder characteristic?" Audrey replied frankly,
It was from a deal. A client wished to receive the help of a spectator demigod and had paid the manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic as an advance.
Durlau immediately laughed. "That actually happened? These generous conditions resemble a father finding an excuse to give his daughter a present. Can you tell me exactly what kind of help you provided?"
Kill another demigod. In this matter, control of one's mind was rather crucial.
Audrey simply explained. Her attitude was very calm, as if she was talking about the homework given to her by a teacher. Durlau's long and fluffy eyebrows twitched as he said, "And you succeeded?"
The results are obvious enough.
Audrey gave an answer rather tactfully. Durlau sized her up and realized that the noble girl on his left was a manipulator who could kill other demigods. Audrey read his thoughts and added,
I was just one of the participants.
Durlau nodded and said, "Do you know where the client's manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic came from?"
He didn't tell me straight with regards to this question.
Audrey gave an answer with a sentence she had long planned out. "He? Can you tell me who he is?" Durlau asked after some deliberation. Audrey had been guarding against the other party's virtual persona from infiltrating her mind island. However, she had yet to notice anything abnormal since the beginning. This made her suspect that the other party didn't need to infiltrate her mind. All he needed to do was observe the fluctuations of the surrounding sea of collective subconscious to understand her true thoughts. She didn't make any attempts to hide and calmly replied,
This concerns an agreement between us. I believe honoring one's promise is a moral standard that the entire world approves of, and in mysticism, this comes into play at a deeper level.
Having said that, Audrey took the initiative to say,
If you can't really trust me, because of my inability to mention this, I'm willing to accept this. I can only remain an ordinary member and use my contributions in exchange for the psychological research materials that are available to me.
Durlau smiled when he heard that. Everyone has their own secrets. This is very normal. What I need to assess is whether your secret will affect the safety of the entire psychology alchemists. He looked deeply at Audrey and said, Then can you tell me how you got to know such a client?
I remember that I once reported that, before joining the psychology alchemists, I'd already come into contact with some people in a mysticism circle and got to know a few beyonders.
Audrey said a truth that couldn't be any truer. As for what the real logical order to the answer was, it was another matter. Furthermore, the matter regarding Klein Rambus's disappearance, which stemmed from the investigation of Forrest and Chio, was something both parties had never talked about but had definitely acknowledged. Durlau retracted his hands from the table and placed them by his chest. There's another thing I would like to ask. When was the last time you met Klein Rambus? Audrey frowned slightly and said,
I remember that I've been asked before.
After Klein Rambus's death, she didn't immediately cut off any contact with the psychology alchemists. She continued to maintain a certain connection with the upper echelons through Hilbert, Stephen, and Escalante. Only when the war reached Backland did she realize that she couldn't contact the members of the psychology alchemists' cell for various reasons. I need to confirm it in person, Durlau said calmly. Audrey nodded gently and said,
The last time I met Klein Rambus was in Viscount Glaint's mansion. At that time, I hypnotized my two Beyonder friends I knew, as per his instructions, and asked them why they were investigating Viscount Stratford and who the mastermind behind this was.
At that time, Counselor Klein Moretti was nearby, ensuring that nothing went wrong with the hypnotism. After he received the answer, he quickly left.
After that day, I never saw him again.
As she answered, Audrey was still guarding against the invasion of her mind island. However, it was calm there, and nothing happened. This didn't make Audrey feel relaxed. Instead, she became even more wary. She didn't even dare to think about anything related to Mr. Fool and the world Gehrman Sparrow. She was only certain of one thing. As long as she was exposed to danger, Mr. Fool would definitely provide her with protection. It's identical to your previous answer. Durlau nodded slowly. He then looked into Audrey's green eyes and said frankly, I can't use mysticism methods to trace the origins of the Beyonder characteristic in your body. This means that the person who provided it has an unimaginable existence behind him. Audrey nodded slightly but forcefully, expressing that she agreed with his assessment. I can't force you to not cooperate with other Beyonders or make deals. It's unrealistic. I just hope that you can promise not to reveal anything about the psychology alchemists to anyone. At the very least, when you wish to entrust certain missions to others, you have to package them and hide the secrets. Durlau said calmly as he retracted his gaze. Audrey replied without hesitation.
I promise not to tell any living creature that isn't qualified to know about matters regarding the psychology alchemists.
She took the initiative to amplify the concept all the way to that of a living being to make up for any loopholes in her promise. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt her thoughts surface from her mind island. These thoughts intertwined, turning into an illusory net that seeped into Audrey's mind island, turning into her subconscious. As this restriction net came from Audrey's spirituality, she would be incapable of removing it even if she became an angel. She would lose the intention of talking about the psychology alchemists when she faced non-members of the psychology alchemists, or people who didn't qualify to know about them. And she wouldn't realize this.
He didn't invade my spiritual island. Just my words alone made the promise turn something substantial.
While Audrey was alarmed, her expression didn't show. Of course, she didn't completely restrain herself, as being surprised by such means was an instinctive reaction from a manipulator. Based on this point, she suspected that either there was something wrong with this city that existed in the heart, or that Durlau, the psychology alchemist's president, wasn't just at the level of a saint. Seeing Audrey make her promise, Durlau pointed at the long table in satisfaction and said, From now on, you are a counselor of the psychology alchemists. You can choose a persona mask as your codename. As he spoke, 7 grayish-white masks appeared on the long table. They were rather illusory and abnormally cold. 5 of them were placed in front of the corresponding seats, as though they already had a master. The remaining 2 persona masks are Wrath and Pride. Durlau introduced. They come from the Holy Bible of the Creator from the 3rd epoch. Audrey thought for a second before reaching out her hand to the mask that didn't contain any anger.
I choose Pride.
Durlau looked at her and chuckled. That was the choice Klein Moretti made back then. Chapter 1318. 7 Councilors. Audrey's right hand paused for a moment before returning to normal. She picked up the mask known as Pride. She replied to Polly Durlau simply,
A 50% chance isn't low.
This was to say that picking the mask that Klein Moretti had worn before wasn't a surprising coincidence. With that said, Audrey wore the cold gray mask on her face. Almost instantly, she felt that she had an additional virtual persona that had appeared in her mind island. This didn't stem from the outside world, but rather a magnification of what she knew to the extremes.
They received very little education. They have to make the right choice under my guidance. Not everyone has enough intelligence. On the contrary, most people are very stupid. Those workers are impulsive and irrational. They are easily enticed by tiny perks and have no foresight. Only with me thinking for them, guiding them, and making decisions for them can they be saved. They are worthy of pity, but they aren't worth communicating with.
These thoughts echoed in Audrey's mind, almost making her believe that this was the truth. After all, This was partial feedback she had received from her previous observation and experience. It wasn't something that had been fabricated out of thin air. With a sweep of her gaze, Audrey saw herself from the smooth surface of the long table. On the cold, gray mask, her eyes moved upwards, fixing it to her forehead, as though she could only see things high above without a care about anything else. It was funny, strange, and secretly horrifying. Audrey fell silent. A few seconds later, she said in a deep voice,
Is this pride?
If it wasn't for the fact that she had long escaped her misconceptions through the exchange between Mr. World, Mr. Hanged Man, and Ma'am Hermit, she might have been truly affected by pride's persona. As for what would happen after being affected, she couldn't tell. Gage Shea, Derlau said approvingly. You recovered much faster than I expected. It looks like you haven't lost yourself in the experience of manipulating others. Audrey replied thoughtfully,
Mr. Kevin Rambus has always appeared a little proud.
Derlau clasped his hands at his chest and said, You could tell? Audrey replied in 2 short sentences,
Only occasionally. Some details.
Derlau sighed and shook his head with a smile. This mask's influence on Kevin Rambus was worse than I expected. Besides, he usually put on a very good disguise. Under this premise, I don't find it strange that he has gone missing. His arrogance will make it impossible for him to see the path beneath his feet. It will make him look down on beyonders who are weaker than him, and this will often bring great danger. Audrey resisted the urge to recall Kevin Rambus's death and asked in deliberation,
These 7 personalities can amplify the corresponding knowledge and emotions to help us realize our own problems, so that we can deal with them directly. At the same time, they will also bring some negative effects and unknowingly change its wearer's personality.
Derlau nodded slightly. In the mind domain, it's very difficult to obtain external help that's pure and without danger. One has to have enough internal strength to avoid the corresponding negative effects. You have walked the right path for you to realize this. Audrey was just about to take the opportunity to discuss some questions about the mind domain when she suddenly saw a mask on the table disappear. She subconsciously turned her head and looked at the entrance of the cathedral. She saw a figure walk in through the door. This figure was wearing a 3-piece formal wear suit, and he had a half-top hat in his hand. He wore the mask that had disappeared earlier on. The mouth on the mask was opened wide until it reached close to the ears. Its mouth remained open as if it wanted to swallow everything that its eyes could see. Derlau did the introductions. This is one of the counselors of the psychology alchemists, Mr. Gluttony. Following that, the remaining counselors of the psychology alchemists arrived one after another. They were Mr. Lust, Ma'am Greed, Miss Sloth, and Mr. Envy. As a senior spectator, Audrey was the first to notice the difference in their masks. Greed was similar to a gluttony. His mouth reached his earlobes, but it wasn't open. Furthermore, his eyes were closed. Lust was similar to pride, but its eyes were different from ordinary people. They had sunk to the middle of their noses, as though they were looking at people from the bottom. Envy's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth were slightly slanted and had a gloomy temperament. Sloth's eyes were tightly shut, and its mouth naturally drooped, giving off the feeling that the wearer was sleeping. Neckasos, seeing all the counselors present, Derlau smiled and said, Let's wait for another friend. He will be the 7th counselor. Heh, 8th, I forgot to count myself. Just as he said that, a figure entered the cathedral's main door. This figure wore a shirt, vest, a black trench coat, and a half-top hat. At a glance, he was a rather fashionable gentleman. However, after some observations, Audrey realized that there was a huge rabbit under the human clothes. Its eyes were bright red and its fur was snow white. The rabbit walked inside, one step at a time, and stopped at the side of the long table. It happened to be beside Audrey. Derlau smiled as he pointed at the wrath mask on the table. Unfortunately, you only have one choice. The rabbit let out a male human voice. I've always been very gentle. It's a good opportunity for me to experience wrath. As it spoke, it picked up the persona mask and wore it on its face. The mask's eyes were wide, and its mouth was wide open, as though an angry roar would shout out at any moment. After Mr. Wrath sat down beside Audrey, Derlau clapped his hands and said, "I formally introduce the two counselors who will be joining our council. This is Miss Pride. This is Mr. Wrath. They are both demigods and have deep attainments in the domain of the mind. In addition, Miss Pride will be in charge of the greater backland area of the Lowen Kingdom." Upon saying that, Derlau looked at Audrey and said, "You might not be aware, but we are rooted in the masses of psychologists, psychiatrists, and the corresponding aficionados. Our strength is mainly concentrated in large cities and not small cities and villages. Therefore, every counselor is responsible for a city and the surrounding area." Then, Derlau continued, "Mr. Wrath is in charge of the Lemberg capital, Azshara. Mr. Lust is in charge of the Intis capital, Trier. Ma'am Greed is in charge of the Fasak capital, St. Milaum. Miss Sloth is in charge of the Fainapotter capital, Fainapotter City. Mr. Envy is in charge of the Intis Republic's Talisi City. Mr. Gluttony is in charge of the Lowen Kingdom's Constant City." After the introduction, Derlau added, "Our psychology alchemists' mission is exploration, discovery, and research. We do not care about affecting the scope, member numbers, resources, etc. Therefore, we do not have any counselors in the Fog Sea, the Berserk Sea, the Sonya Sea, and the Southern Continent. Of course, there will often be members who go out to the sea to explore the ruins of the Southern Continent in search of ancient history. Heh, I forgot that I'm the king of the Black Throne on the 5 seas. St. Milom, Constant Talisi. Nearly half of the counselors of the psychology alchemists are in the Mid-Seashire region. Audrey acutely sensed a problem. She came from a noble family and had received good education since she was young. She was no stranger to the geographical location of every city in the northern continent. She knew that Fasak's St. Milam, Lowen's Constant, and Intis's Talisi were big coastal cities of Mid-Seashire. Although they couldn't compare to the 3 major cities of Backland, Trier, and Fainapotter City, each of them was quite large. Furthermore, there were many medium-sized cities around them. This made the Mid-Seashire coast become the most vibrant economic zone in the northern continent, an area with the biggest population. Under such circumstances, it wasn't too surprising that the focus of the psychology alchemists was placed on Mid-Seashire. Audrey generally didn't think that the psychology alchemists weren't too interested in expansion. After the counselors got to know each other, Derlau turned his head and said to Audrey, "Miss Pride, due to the war, Backland psychology alchemists suffered great losses. We have lost contact with many of the members. I will give you a specific list in the future. You will be in charge of confirming the whereabouts of the members and then organize them again. In this process, I suggest that you don't use your real image and name to finish the tasks. Create a virtual identity to complete them. Rambis didn't do well in this aspect. I think he's a little too proud." Audrey nodded slightly and agreed. Derlau retracted his gaze and said, "The second thing to discuss today is the whereabouts of the Mind Dragon in Eastchester County of the Lowen Kingdom. The dragon-worshipping customs of the Heartlark village haven't been weakened in the past 2 years. I suspect that the Mind Dragon is still influencing it in some way. Perhaps we can use it to find its whereabouts. Who is willing to handle this matter?" After raising the question, he recalled that the newly joined Miss Pride and Mr. Wrath didn't have enough knowledge of the corresponding situation. He simply explained the explorations the psychology alchemist had previously done, as well as the problems that his entire archaeological team members encountered. Audrey had actually participated in some matters in the early stages. Now that she had a suitable reason to intervene, she couldn't help but feel her heart palpitate. It wasn't that she really wanted to hunt the Mind Dragon, but rather she wanted to communicate with it and grasp more knowledge and secrets of the mind domain. However, she wasn't in a hurry to raise her hand. As a counselor participating in the council for the first time, she would rather miss an opportunity than be eager to showcase herself. Mr. Lust surveyed the area and said, "This is Lowen's matter. It's not suitable for us to interfere. unless Miss Pride and Mr. Gluttony don't have the time for it. Audrey waited for a few more seconds. Seeing that the Gluttony didn't say anything, she looked at Durlow and said,
I will try to investigate, but I need more detailed information.
Chapter 1319, Life-Preserving Incantation. Seeing that Audrey was willing to attempt the investigation mission, Durlow nodded and said, I'll give you the detailed information later, but I have to warn you that this matter is rather dangerous. You must not be careless. Upon saying that, Durlow paused for a moment and said, If you encounter an accident and you can't solve it by relying on yourself, you can try to say a name. This will bring you salvation.
What name?
Audrey asked as she had a guess in mind. Durlow's expression immediately turned solemn. It comes from the Holy Bible of the Third Epic's creator. It involves the highest mystery of the mind domain, and it has a close relationship with something of the psychology alchemists. It's Adam. Adam. Audrey didn't find it surprising at all, but she showed her puzzlement on the surface, as though she didn't know what this name meant. Ramit, Durlow didn't explain, and instead said, As a counselor, you should be in charge of a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, you and Wrath have just joined the ranks, so there must be an observation period first. Besides, the former committee member of the Backland region, Havin Rambis, has lost a rather important sealed artifact. We are considering whether we should change the usage method of sealed artifacts and allow usage only via an application. In other words, all the sealed artifacts will be kept in this mine city. You usually won't hold on to them and can only use them temporarily after an application for a particular incident. The woman in charge of Faysac's capital, St. Milome, immediately shook her head. There is a very serious flaw in this method. That is, that we are unable to deal with any sudden accidents. Be it enemies or monsters, once we encounter them, we will not have the time to apply and retrieve the sealed artifact. I believe that the current method is good enough. Everyone wields a Grade 1 sealed artifact to deal with accidents. When there's a need, we can apply for other items. Durlow laughed and said, This was indeed better in the past. But now you don't have to worry. As long as you have the chance to resist an accident, then you can directly enter this mine city to avoid the enemy and obtain the item. If there's no chance, just as I said, reciting the name Adam will do.
You said Adam twice. That entity is probably already watching? No, he might have been watching from the very beginning.
Audrey's heart almost beat faster when she heard that. Then how do we enter without your invitation? Mr. Envy asked as he nodded. Durlow pointed at his face and said, From this council meeting forth, you can take your persona mask out of this city, no matter where you are. As long as there are at least 2 humans around you, yes, other than you will be able to wear the corresponding persona mask and enter the city. And these 7 masks are illusory. They are closely connected to what you know, and there's no need to store them in a special way. With just a thought, you will be able to take them out of the sea of collective subconscious. At that moment, the man, who was wearing the gluttony mask and exuded a feeling that he was lost in indulgence, thought for a while and said, Will bringing the persona mask out of this city affect our mental state and true personality? There will be some effects that need attention. But I believe that you are all experts in the mind domain. You have the ability to resolve problems in this aspect, Durlow said frankly. Audrey was a little worried that these 7 persona masks had something to do with Adam, but she didn't dare think about it in the Mind City. She forced herself to rein in her thoughts and replied to what Durlow had said before.
I can accept the 2 safekeeping methods of the Grade 1 sealed artifact. I'll patiently wait for the probationary period to end.
Miss, you aren't proud. Miss Sloth, who looked like she was sleeping, commented with a smile. After discussing the Mind Dragon in Eastchester County, the other 5 counselors began introducing things that were worth paying attention to in their respective areas as an exchange of information. During this process, Mr. Gluttony, who seemed to be capable of eating an entire cow at any moment and wore 10 rings, said, The Constant region hasn't been peaceful recently. there have been many miracles happening one after another. First, Constant City was rebuilt overnight. Second, Beltane City citizens collectively lost their memories of a certain period of time. Third, a powerful archmage who grants the wishes of others for pleasure has been wandering the eastern shore of the mid-seashore. He's called Merlin Hermes. Related to this, there's an item known as the fully automatic wishing machine. Other than that, I also noticed something strange. Many rats, cockroaches, and crows in Constant City have lost their souls, days after the city was miraculously restored. Why were you able to sense this problem? Mr. Lust looked up at Gluttony from the bottom. Gluttony gulped and said, I've been researching the mind problems of ordinary creatures recently. Rats, cockroaches, and crows are my experimental subjects. The councilors immediately started discussing the direction of this research before the meeting officially entered the third stage. Their academic exchange enriched Audrey's knowledge quite a bit. She listened very seriously and would occasionally share her thoughts and insights. After a while, Durlau clapped his hands. All right, this conference will end here. Audrey subconsciously wanted to stand up and lead the other counselors into bowing and bidding farewell. However, she quickly came to her senses and continued sitting there, being the penultimate person to stand up. Before leaving, she asked curiously,
Mr. President, does this city have a name?
Yes. Durlau laughed. The Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Audrey saw that the other counselors were walking towards the door and asked thoughtfully,
There are many cathedrals here. They should represent a faith. I wonder which existence the residents here believe in.
Durlau nodded and replied solemnly, The omnipotent and omniscient Creator.
Garden of Eden, the omnipotent and omniscient Creator. If this wasn't created by Adam, I'll write my name backward.
Above the gray fog, inside the ancient palace, Klein looked at the crimson star representing Miss Justice and silently muttered to himself.
In addition, to recite Adam when faced with danger as a response would indicate a problem without concealing anything.
Klein gently tapped the edge of the long model table and conjured a pen and paper to write his thoughts. This wasn't something he couldn't analyze based on his own thinking. Instead, when facing an existence like Adam, he needed to repeatedly ponder and analyze the details. Thus, the words that formed on the paper helped him to read them back and forth so as to notice and make up any missing details.
Basic premise. Adam has already advanced to sequence 0 using the full-scale war from before. By becoming a true god, he can be known as a visionary. Miss Justice happened to become a sequence 4 manipulator after Heaven Rambus's death. She may be able to convince others, but she can't convince Adam. What does Adam want? Setting up a sequence 4 saint doesn't match his identity as a visionary unless he has another ploy up his sleeves. His real target is the Mind Dragon, or is it me who's backing Miss Justice? Care and vigilance must be enhanced on this matter. We must not be careless. In the Garden of Eden, the cathedral that the psychology alchemist counselors were using is similar to Adam's corpse cathedral. However, it's only a little similar. The stone columns on its exterior are inlaid with several skulls. There is no corresponding layout inside, and the color is dark black and very gloomy. What does this mean? What does that grayish-white dragon coiling around the huge cross symbolize? The first step in resurrecting the Creator has been successful. Adam is already a visionary. If his father or the original Creator returns, he would be the first one to be unlucky. He is willing to sacrifice himself? This is the meaning of being zealous. That rabbit is suspected to be Hermes. However, as an angel of the spectator pathway, it doesn't make sense for him to not be able to remove Miss Messenger's transformation curse after so long, especially since he has a visionary who can provide help. Did Hermes do it on purpose? Yes, the president of the psychology alchemists, Durlau, mentioned that to the spectator, death only represented the end of one's identity. He can still participate in other theatrical plays and other aspects as another identity. By combining them together, does this mean that once the spectator pathway reaches sequence 3 or sequence 2, they can separate the identities they once held and make them become living people. And even if these identities were to die, it wouldn't lead to the deaths of their real bodies. It does look like the preamble to becoming a visionary. The rabbit that Hermes turned into after being cursed was separated as an identity which later directly participated in these psychology alchemists? What does he want to do? Back then, when the Twilight Hermit Order communicated, he was sitting beside the Emperor.
After Klein was done writing, he put down his fountain pen and carefully read the contents a few times, his heart clouded with mystery and puzzlement. In the end, he could only decide to continue observing and be vigilant. And at this moment, Audrey had already taken the carriage she used, exited the Garden of Eden, and returned to the park in Empress Borough with the man-made lake. She wasn't in a rush to pray to Mr. Fool, hoping that there would be a better way to seal the pride mask. She returned to her luxurious villa as though nothing had happened. Chapter 1320. Mind Mail. Susie was sitting by the door, waiting for Audrey to return. At that moment, the golden retriever immediately went up to her as soon as she saw her approach. She even gave a rather talented showcase of her acting by barking and wagging her tail. She didn't ask on the spot. Instead, she kept accompanying Audrey back to her bedroom before asking in concern.
Is it over?
Audrey tersely acknowledged, indicating that there was no problem.
Is there anything I can help you with?
Susie pressed.
Not yet.
Audrey shook her head slightly. Due to Susie's concern, she instinctively recalled her previous experience, but to her surprise, she realized that she couldn't recall the image and name of the psychology alchemist's president. To recall even the information that she had learned from the World Gehrman Sparrow, she had to focus quite a bit. To be frank, in front of Beyonders below the demigod level, she could do similar feats as a manipulator. However, to influence a saint in the mind domain and make it impossible for them to sense it was almost impossible unless the other party was hypnotized, unconscious, or enslaved.
That gentleman's level is probably higher than I expected.
Audrey controlled her emotions and calmly made a certain judgment. She gave Susie a look and got the golden retriever to stand guard outside the door. In her mind, she outlined the character mask that represented pride. Just as she was thinking about this, she felt a slight fluctuation in the sea of collective subconscious around her. With just a thought, Audrey reached out her left hand and grabbed it. She took out an abnormally cold, illusory grayish-white mask.
As long as I seriously think about it, will this pride mask come to my side? Or should I say that it has already existed in my subconscious and has been following me?
As Audrey carefully examined her mind island, she signaled with a thought that made the pride mask vanish. The ice-cold, illusory grayish-white mask quickly turned transparent and melted into the surrounding sea of collective subconscious. Audrey still couldn't determine where this pride mask had gone.
Why did it appear in such a timely manner each time?
This made her increasingly wary. She decided to pray to Mr. Fool and make the wish of sealing the mask. Just as she was thinking of doing a few more experiments to obtain more knowledge from pride, she saw the sea of collective subconscious begin to resonate without using her manipulator beyond her powers. A beam of light came from afar as it grew larger and more obvious. Finally, it turned into an illusory letter. This letter stopped in front of Audrey's mind island as though it was searching for a path to complete the delivery. Audrey naturally wouldn't let any foreign object enter her mind world. She hurriedly reached out her left hand and touched the illusory letter. Seeing that her fingers were about to touch the surface of the letter, Audrey suddenly stopped. Her experience and intelligence told her at the same time.
Don't touch anything in the mysticism world rashly. This was especially so for the mind domain. Otherwise, it would easily lead to corruption and produce mental problems.
With this in mind, Audrey produced a virtual persona and put on the black, long-veiled glove, Hand of Horror. After making the necessary preparations, she reached out to grab the illusory letter and watched as it peeled away its outer layer and flipped over one page at a time. This was all the information related to the Mind Dragon in East Chester County.
to use the sea of collective subconscious to transmit information. The higher-ups of the spectator pathway are truly amazing.
As a manipulator, Audrey had been trying her best to maintain her initial yearning towards the mysticism world. It was a pure and innocent pursuit of dreams and magic. This was one of the ways to prevent herself from losing herself in the manipulating experience of things and not be assimilated by the sea of collective subconscious. After flipping through all the information, Audrey let the illusory letter melt into the sea of collective subconscious. She was still in no hurry to pray to Mr. Fool. According to her previous arrangements, she went out to be busy over other things. At dusk, before the banquet at home began, she found some time to quickly make a prayer in her bedroom and make a wish. In the next second, Audrey saw the grayish-white pride appear from the sea of collective subconscious in front of her. The illusory feeling slowly vanished as a tiny amount of metallic luster flashed. For some reason, this persona mask had a certain substantial feel to it, as though it was bordering between illusory and realism. This meant that it was isolated from Audrey's mind island in a physical sense. Of course, it also lost the ability to return to the sea of collective subconscious. Audrey held pride and attempted to remove lie that had turned into an emerald necklace, overlapping the two together. Just as she had expected, the half-illusory, half-real pride embedded itself into lie, turning into a blob of patterns that roughly looked like a human face.
In the future, I'll use this method to carry it with me. I won't allow the persona mask to have any contact with my mind or body until I need to use it.
Audrey's mind raced as she sincerely thanked Mr. Fool. She then left for the banquet hall. Along the way, she met her father, Earl Hall.
Good news.
Earl Hall laughed. Audrey didn't hide her surprise.
Alfred's coming back.
This was her other brother.
You actually guessed it.
Earl Hall said in surprise.
In the next half of the year, he will return to Backland as a general.
Half a year. Susie is already a dreamwalker.
Audrey thought for a moment and asked,
Father, when are we returning to Eastchester County?
As the war had just ended and there were many things in the kingdom that needed to be done, the nobles didn't return to their respective fiefs during New Year's. They remained in Backland all this time. It was already the end of February. Earl Hall nodded and said,
About April.
In the ancient palace above the fog.
Mind mail. Be careful of viruses. Don't click on them without thought.
As Klein sighed, he threw the curtain that represented the attendant of Mysteries Beyond Her characteristic back into the junk pile, allowing it to cover all the items there. He had just fulfilled Miss Justice's wish, using the grafting ability he named. He connected the illusory concept of the persona mask to an ordinary metal mask, and he gave the Worms of Spirit, who were on duty at Sapphire Castle, an order to recharge the powers from time to prolong the grafting effect.
From the description of Mr. Gluttony from the Psychology Alchemists, Zaratul seems to have found Constant City. I have to be even more careful.
Klein tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his finger, causing Worms of Spirit to appear from his body. His figure vanished from Sapphire Castle. Winter County, Amantha Mountain Range, Cathedral of Serenity. Leonard obtained a document from the Pope. This was the first thing he was responsible for after becoming a high-ranking deacon. After returning to his room, Leonard leisurely leaned back and placed his feet on the desk. Then he opened the document in his hand and began reading. A wandering magician, Merlin Hermes, grants the wishes of others for pleasure. The newly rebuilt Constant City. Fully automatic wishing machine. Sequence 4 of the Seer pathway is Bizarro Sorcerer, Sequence 3 is Scholar of Yore, and Sequence 2 is Miracle Invoker. Leonard read until he suddenly fell silent. After a few seconds, he suppressed his voice and asked,
Old man, how many angels of the Seer pathway are active across the land?
Pelez Zoroast scoffed.
This is acting. There should only be one miracle invoker who still needs to act. You should know who I'm talking about.
Leonard looked at the information in his hand again and mumbled.
He's having quite a good time.
He had already decided that the main purpose of this mission was to act as a night watcher and digest his potion. He could also travel in passing. As for handling the matter, what mattered was to find a reasonable explanation. After flipping through the thick documents in boredom, Leonard retracted his feet and stood up. He was going to retrieve a Grade 1 sealed artifact that a high-ranking deacon like him could own. To other saints of the Church of Evernight, this was quite a headache. This was because the negative effects of sealed artifacts weren't easily endured. It was even more so when one needed to carry them for a long period of time. However, if one chose a holy artifact that was more compatible with him, there would be a problem of powers overlapping. As for Leonard, he didn't need to worry about this problem. As long as the sealed artifact he was interested in had a living characteristic, he could get Old Man's help. By parasitizing it with a worm of time, it significantly reduced the negative effects of the sealed artifact, making it as obedient as the word of the sea.
Therefore, the main thing to choose is its powers.
Leonard whistled and walked out of the room. Monday afternoon, in the ancient palace above the gray fog. Dark red beams shot out, materializing into different figures. Derek hadn't needed to count his heartbeat for a long time. All he needed to do was take a look at the wall clock and calculate the time difference with Backlund to know how much longer before the tarot gathering happened. At that moment, he stood up with Miss Justice and the other members of the Tarot Club. He bowed to the end of the long bronze table and said,
"Good afternoon, Mr. Fool."
After taking their seats and paying their respects, Emlyn glanced left and right and said,
I want to know if there's something special about the planter and the moon pathways compared to the other pathways?
After raising the question, he didn't hide it and instead added frankly,
I recently learned that the internal system of the Church of Earth is different from other normal systems. It's split into two categories, favored and blessed.
After Emlyn finished his simple description, Alger, Ketlia, Leonard, and company looked at each other, unable to provide a reasonable explanation. Of course, every member present, including Derek, could tell that the internal system of the Church of Earth was abnormal. At this moment, they heard a soft sigh. This sigh seemed to come from an era more ancient than ancient. It came from Mr. Fool, who sat at the end of the long, mottled table.